I will start by flagging off 2 points. I work on cities in Hyderabad as opposed to cities in Gujarat, but the history of migration that Professor just spoke about is similar. But there are 2 points that one needs to bear in mind, that the slavery in the Indian Ocean was an established practice since as long as trade has existed in the Indian Ocean. However, it was smaller in scale, with ivory, hide, spices, etc., making more lucrative trade. And also, slavery was not racialized, so it was not necessary that people who were sold into slavery were black Africans. This starts happening with the coming of colonialism, where the scale of slavery increases, and so it gets racialized as well. Further, it is also important to understand that Islam dominated the Western Indian Ocean, which allowed for greater social mobility. So, for example, manumitting slaves was an act that was rewarded spiritually. So a lot of people manumitted slaves, and children of mixed parentage, that is slave and owner, were absorbed into families and the tribes, usually patrilineally. Was not racialized till the coming of European colonialism. However, it is also important to bear in mind that in the Indian Ocean, women and girls were sold into slavery more often than men were, and eunuchs were the highest price of the slaves. So, slavery was more conspicuous consumption before the coming of colonialism. With the coming of colonialism, what happens is plantations come about, coffee, tea, sugarcane, etc., and a whole new economy comes about. And one sees that black Africans are being forced into slavery in sort of the popular imagination, the way we understand slavery now, which is transatlantic. So we see that sort of move happening in the Indian Ocean as well. But Indian Ocean slavery has to be understood as a more complex system that has existed for a longer time. So under Islam, there was a phenomena of slave elites also, and it is very, very important that one talks of the slave elites, because the history of the Deccan of India cannot be understood if you do not engage with the concept of slave elites. These were people who were removed from their native places through forced migration. However, they, as military slaves, they rose up the ranks and became important generals and power brokers all over the Deccan. So from the Bahmanis to the Ahmednagar to Bijapur Sultanates, some important names being Malik Ambar, Malik Kafur, etc. Janjira Island being another example of slave elites ruling a fortress that was undefeated till the 18th century. So also in the south, the Deccan, there is palpable African presence that is noticed in the paintings. So from 16th to 19th century, paintings depict African administrator, noblemen, eunuchs, concubines, and palace slaves. Eunuchs are very important confidants in courts, in royal courts. So you have to understand eunuchs as being not only just slaves that were sold at high prices, they were also playing very important roles in court intrigues, etc. In Hyderabad, the history of in Hyderabad city, the history of the cities can be traced all the way back to 1591 under Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah, the fifth Qutub Shahi king, who had Habshis. Now, Habash in Arabic means Ethiopia. So, Habshis means people from Ethiopia, but of course, nation states were not about at that point. So, Ethiopia would include Eritrea as well, most probably, like the imagination that we have now. So, under the Quli Qutub, there were Habshi guards. This is, of course, evident if you have been to Hyderabad. There's a place called the Habshi Kaman in Golconda Fort. In Golconda Fort, and there was a female battalion of guards called the Gardan that protected the harem, who were also Habshi female guards. Under the Asif Jahis, which are the kings that come about after the Quli Qutubs are defeated by Aurangzeb, under the Asif Jahi dynasty, this Africans primarily form the Nizam's royal bodyguards or the prince's royal bodyguards. Now, this is a point I would like to stress because what we understand as Siddhis today is a community that emerges in the last 400 years. So, although Africans have been migrating through history, a distinct black Indian African community emerges in the last 400 years. And what I argue is that it is the time when colonialism has already come about through indirect rule, modernization processes are about, and a certain entrenchment of racist ideas have come about. So you see that integration of black African slaves is not happening, and these distinct communities are emerging. Siddhis and Hadramis, the other community I'll introduce in a minute, are referred popularly as Chaush in Hyderabad, which is a Turkish term that means guards. The Ottomans were very important to the Asif Jahis, the second dynasty that ruled Hyderabad. They sort of owed their allegiance to the Ottoman ways of living and courtliness. So Siddhis and Hadramis are called Chaush in Hyderabad. Further, because Hadramis, the Arabs, were instrumental in sort of getting black African slaves to Hyderabad, Siddhis in Hyderabad are very distinct from Siddhis elsewhere in India. They are Shafi'i Muslims. The music that they play, so the drums that they play are Afro-Arab drums called Daf and Marfa, which is different from the drums that are played in Gujarat and Karnataka. They are not endogamous in their marriage practices, mostly because of class problems and racist attitudes. They do tend to marry within the community, but it is not a must. If a better match comes along, they can women and men can marry outside, and I've met examples of that. And then the other thing that one needs to bear in mind is that Siddhis in Hyderabad also dress like Hadramis. So the Hadramis in Hyderabad wear something called the sarung, which is a lungi of sorts with geometrical patterns on it, made in power looms in Indonesia. And the Siddhi, if you go to the Siddhi neighborhood in Hyderabad, they wear the same clothes, showing that there has been this sort of interaction between both the diaspora groups, with the Hadramis being instrumental in getting Siddhis to Hyderabad. What is the major crux of the argument I would like to discuss here is how do we understand race in a non-Western space like India? And I think knowledge production has a lot to do with it. And by this, I'll give you concrete examples. The Siddhis in Hyderabad did not know Siddhis in Karnataka and Siddhis in Gujarat existed. In 2000 and in 2006, scholars, ethnomusicologists, journalists, scholars like me, documentary filmmakers, arranged two respective international conferences where Siddhis were introduced to each other from different regions, and this was done with the intent of they are extremely deprived in all three states, including Maharashtra, so 4 states. This was done with the intent of getting these to organize. However, this whole consciousness, this black consciousness comes about, which in itself is interesting because the tropes that Siddhis now borrow from are very transatlantic. This whole slave victim diaspora that is sort of entrenched in the plantation economies of the Caribbean, etc., seems to be applying to the Indian Ocean, and this heuristically that would be wrong to do that. Amongst other things, there's the Goma dance that Professor spoke about. The costumes for the Goma dance are actually not from the East African coast. They are from Senegal. The cities in Gujarat saw Senegalese performance in Mumbai, and from there they borrowed these costumes and sort of orientalized them to suit this idea of the African that we have. So they are also playing into these ideas of Africans that the normal Indian has. I think this is very important to realize because race has been understood very differently in the Indian Ocean world otherwise. Other than that, what Professor spoke about cities being considered natural at sports, this is also a very racist attitude which has become very entrenched in the government of India. So it is assumed that cities will be good at running, hockey, Pehlwani, and traditionally they have done that. So in Hyderabad they're known for hockey and Pehlwani. However, to assume that they're naturally good at it, I think comes from this time of colonialism, from the Nizam's time, which is when a black community is also emerging. So. With this, I would rest my point about the cities, and central to it is the understanding that knowledge production frames race. Hadramis, on the other hand, come from the region of Hadramut, a very different diasporic group compared to cities. They maintain active ties with their homeland, so the initial migration out of Hadramut was that of Saids, and they assumed multiple roles when they traveled. They were instrumental in spreading Islam in the Indian Ocean. They were the alim. They assumed the role of the alim, the Sufi, and the merchant at the same time. And the caste system in India and the notions of ritual purity and pollution sort of helped the whole idea of the privilege that the Saids as descendants of Muhammad enjoyed. So when they came to India, they received a warmer welcome from the new converts, so etc., because we already have the entrenched notions of caste here. But the Hadramis in Hyderabad did not come mostly as Saids or as merchants, they came as mercenaries. What happened in the 19th century was that the Mughal Empire started disintegrating with the coming of the European colonial power, European technologies, and trained regularized forces. And the new sort of states that emerged with the disintegration of the Mughal Empire as it became weaker were military oligarchies that depended heavily on foreign mercenaries, because foreign mercenaries were ethnically foreign, locally unconnected, and politically neutral. So, for example, Arab soldiers were the highest paid mercenaries in the Maratha army, with under Peshwa, Balaji Bajirao, Nana Fadnis, and the Bhosla Rajas of Nagpur. They also served under the Gaikwad Maharaja and of Baroda and Bhav Singh Ji of Bhavnagar. Who is working with? So by the end of the 19th century, the British had established complete political and economic domination of the subcontinent by control of South India and Bengal. And when the Marathas lost the Anglo-Maratha War in the 1817 and the 1818, a lot of the Arab mercenaries who were foreign-born were sent back to Hadramut, but the Creole or the Muwallad Arabs, they did not know what to do with them. So the Nizam in Hyderabad offered them refuge, and that is when you see this influx of these Hadrami mercenaries and soldiers coming into Hyderabad. Of these, two became very important Jamadars under the Nizam and funded their own sultanates in Hadramut, which came to become the Southern Protectorate of Aden, and thus they held these British passports that helped them sort of move between British-controlled territories of India and Hadramut. And this is also important because they sort of placarded the Nizam to intervene on their behalf regularly every time a dispute would come about. Now, here also I would like to talk about race a bit, because Arabs in archival documents and by early historians very easily accounts from that time are understood as backward and unruly. They were thought of as someone who's scary. So you see the switch in attitude. Hadramis earlier were treated with respect because they were seen as Saeed. Then all of a sudden, with the coming of colonialism and this entrenchment of tropes of barbaric Moor in South Asia, you see them being treated as something that is to be feared. Also, Eng Seng Ho argues that Hadrami Saids offered a counter to the universal philosophy that colonialism represented. And universal here should not be understood in the Huntingtonian sense. Universal should not be seen in the binary of universal and specific, rather as a diasporic group, something that is contingent and connected in sociality. So the idea of Islam that these cosmopolitan societies all over the Indian Ocean represented also showed certain similarities, and it is these interconnectedness that offered a counter to the universal that colonialism was bringing about, and it was threat in the sense of ideas. So moving to the present time, today Hadramis they sort of assert their Arab identity along with their Hyderabadi identity, but the Arab identity is very important. Although interaction, sort of travel between Hadramaut and Hyderabad have reduced, marriages between cousins have gone down, the new generation is not bilingual, or the early generation spoke both the Dakkani Urdu as well as Arabic. So, I mean, you see all these sort of interactions going down. However, the Arab identity is still very, very important, and this is seen in many sort of markers. So, for example, men wear the saroons that I just mentioned that are made in the looms in Indonesia, where Hadramis originally migrated and were engaged in cotton cloth trade and batik trade. Women still wear very Gulf looking galabiyas and hijab, or if they wear salwar kameez, the hijab is they wear hijab inside the house. They observe strict parda, they wear burqa outside. Something I would like to mention here that is important is not only are the food practices and the clothing sort of sartorial practices maintained here, there's something that that through my fieldwork I've realized in what I call mobility paradox, which is that although Hyderabad has come up as a cyber tech center, and through Gulf migration, and there's been massive Gulf migration that has happened from this community, there's a lot of money in this community now, and children are educated. However, they don't want to sort of claim their stake in the cyber boom. So there is discrimination, of course, but also you do not see the thrust coming from the community to claim a stake in the prosperity that Hyderabad has seen. If you ask most people, they still want to migrate to Gulf. So there's an aspirational aspect to Gulf, because traditionally Hadramis have dominated the Western Indian Ocean. They have migrated. It is natural for them. They have families settled all over Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Yemen, cousins, sisters married to cousins, etc., etc., aunts in Yemen. So you see this sort of it is aspirational as well as it is something that is genealogical. Like you can see historically they've done it. So this is the mobility paradox. So while the opportunities are there and they can use their representatives to stake a claim in that, you don't see them doing that. Also, something very interesting about the women is that the parda system is so strict over there that I met women who had not been 2 streets down from their house but had traveled through the whole of Saudi and UAE. So they knew more about UAE and Saudi than they knew about Barkas, which is the neighborhood they were born in and live in. So with that I will